Welcome to Gemara Markings. Today's Shiur is Yuma Daf Pei Aleph. Today's Shiur begins at the Mishnah that you will find on the seventh of the wide lines on Daf Pei Aleph. The Mishnah: Ochal v'shosa behelam echad, eino chayov elo chatas achas. If a person did these two acts, eating and drinking, in one hell, in one state of lack of awareness. In other words, he didn't discover between the eating and the subsequent drinking that it was Yom Kippur. He wasn't aware. So it was one state of lack of awareness. That results in bringing only one korban chatos, one sin offering. If, however, let us say the same scenario took place, ochal v'shos, however, he became aware in the interim that it was Yom Kippur. He ate a date quantity or more of food, and then in a state of forgetfulness, not realizing it was Yom Kippur, and then became aware, and then later on forgot, and drank a revius, which is a liquid measure that is the minimum amount for being guilty on Yom Kippur. In a case like that, where he remembered in the interim, he would have to bring two sin offerings. Now, this point of ochal v'shosa behelam echad, in one state of lack of awareness resulting in one korban chatos, this is in contrast with the next case, ochal v'osa malacha. He ate and he did an act of constructive activity. Let us say he engaged in sewing or in writing. So he ate and then did another, and then did an act of malacha, of constructive activity on Yom Kippur, in one state of lack of awareness, not becoming aware in the interim that it was Yom Kippur, chayav shtei chatos, because of their very different nature. One is an eating offense, which is a violation of inui, where he is supposed to maintain a state of self-deprivation, and he didn't. And the other is the realm of malach, of constructive activity. Since they're two disparate realms, even though there was one state of lack of awareness, nevertheless, that generates the need to bring two separate sin offerings, two separate chatois. The Mishnah now goes into a different aspect of things. Ochal oichlim she'enon ru'in lachila. A person ate food items that aren't fit for eating. V'shosa mashkin she'enon ru'in l'shtia, or drank things that are not fit for drinking. Potter. So he's exempt. That's not considered a Yom Kippur violation. Shosot sir or murias, potter. If he drank sir or murias, sir and murias fall into the category, a general category of we'll say brine, something. These are things that people would not drink, so they are exempt. Omar Reish Lakish, Mipnei ma lo nemra azhora be'inui. The topic that we are about to embark upon is why in the Torah is there no negative command regarding eating and drinking and the other four descriptions of inui in the Torah. Truth be told, that only eating and drinking is the real doraisa level prohibition. So why is there no lav concerning inui? Now, we should point out parenthetically that the Torah is not warning on Yom Kippur against the act of eating. In other words, you wouldn't say in the Torah, lo sochlu b'Yom Kippur, because what the Torah is expecting of us is to experience inui, self-deprivation. There is basically a positive command you are to deprive yourselves of food and drink on Yom Kippur. However, there's no negative command. There's no lav. Generally speaking, if there is a negative command in the Torah, and one is warned before committing the offense that he is about to violate a negative command that would result in in lashing. So if he goes ahead and violates, he would get a set of 39 lashes. As far as a negative command for Yom Kippur, for the eating on Yom Kippur, we don't find such a verse. And hence, that's the issue right now. Why is there no negative command concerning Yom Kippur, the eating on Yom Kippur? The Gemara is going to answer very simply, Mishum Delo Efsher, because it's not possible to write, to author a meaningful verse that would express a negative command. Heichi Nichtov, and here you can see with our markings a series of double underlines. These are all attempts to show what could have been written, and each time the Gemara will suggest or will reject the suggestion. Heichi Nichtov, how could it be phrased? Nichtov Rachmana lo yochal. Should the Torah write, do not eat? Yeah, that wouldn't be accurate though. Achila bekezayis. When you see the term achila in the Torah, it means an olive quantity. Yet we know that Yom Kippur is prohibited in not an olive quantity. If one eats an olive quantity of food, an olive size or an olive amount of food on Yom Kippur, he's not in violation. Only if he eats a greater amount, namely a date quantity of food. Nichtov Rachmana lo se'uneh. Should the Torah write, again in a negative phrasing, do not afflict yourself? Well, if the Torah would write, do not deprive yourself, do not suffer, kum echol mashma, it would sound as if the Torah is commanding you, get up and eat. And obviously that's not what you are to do on Yom Kippur. Maskif law Rav Oshaya. Rav Oshaya raises a question. Why do you say there's no way to write it? Nichtov Rachmana Hishomer pen lo seuneh. These are expressions, Hishomer pen, that indicate a negative command. So let the Torah phrase itself like this. Be very careful that you should not abrogate self-deprivation. The Gemara says, well, if it would be phrased like this, im kain nefishi lehu lavi, that would create too many negative commands. We're looking for a singular negative command. Each one of those words, hishomer and pen, constitute each one on their own a negative command. And the Torah doesn't necessarily want to have a plethora of negative commands. Maskif law Rav Bevai bar Abaye. Nichtov Rachmana, let the Torah write, Hishomer b'mitzvas inui. Having established that Hishomer indicates a negative command, so let it write that. Hishomer, that would be your negative command, the mitzvah in fulfillment of this particular command of inui, self-deprivation. The Gemara says no, that wouldn't be effective, because im kain hishomer de lav equals lav, hishomer de asay equals asay. When the word hishomer appears together with a command that essentially is negative, then hishomer would be negative. However, if hishomer appears together with a positive command, for example, the mitzvah of inui, you are commanded in a positive fashion to experience pain or suffering or self-deprivation. So that would then make the hishomer into a positive command, so that hishomer linked with mitzvahs inui wouldn't accomplish what we are looking for, a source or a verse that would express a negative command. Maskif lo Ravashi, nichtov al tosur min ho inui. Why not phrase this? Phrase it like this. Do not deviate from Inui. Now, saying here you're not using the word hishomer. You're saying al tasur, do not. There you've got your negative tone. Do not deviate from Inui. Now that's a very good suggestion. And the Gemara says kashya. For this we have no response. So in the initial question of Reish Lakish, why didn't the Torah write a negative command and it could have been phrased al tasur mino Inui? So we don't know. We don't have an answer for that. As we continue, we have a series marking. We have a bow tie shape, and on the side of the Gemara, under the Mivneh, we have the bow tie is featured, and we've written there 4 makoros la'azhora le'inui, 4 sources indicating that there is an azhora. There exists an azhora for Inui. And as we said earlier, the nafkamina of having an azhora, a negative command, would be that if one is warned ahead of time that in violation they could be subject to lashings, then the court would be able to administer the lashing punishment for such a violation. So here we have a point. We're calling this a long point. We're not introducing. It's not a. It's simply a point that the Tana Maisi Lo Mehacha. The Tana brings a source for a negative command in the following fashion. And truth be told, one has to go through this entire framed section plus the Gemara that follows. It's not going to be obvious in the source itself. Before we learn the text, we're going to give an overview of what we're about to see. Very highly structured Gemara. In this source, you see initially a series of triangles. The word yochel is highlighted. Yochel each time introduces a question. And on the side of the Gemara, we have the following note. Yochel are she'elois shematorosam lahochiach. The goal of each one of these triangles is to prove she'ein oinesh v'afilu ein azhora al tosefes Yom Kippur. The concept of tosefes, which we've dashed, underlined as the source goes on, is adding. Tosefes means to add. Adding time, adding minutes on the clock to the observance of Yom Kippur aspects of Yom Kippur, even before the holiday formally begins. Let us assume that the technical beginning of Yom Kippur is as 3 stars appear. Laila, 3 stars. That's the official Torah beginning. If we speak in more general terms, we'll say as it becomes officially dark. What the Torah envisions is that one starts observing aspects of holiness. We'll see later in our sugya, this has validity and applicability with regard to Shabbos, with regard to Yom Tov, holidays, that even while it's still day, and we're not talking about many hours, we're just talking about, in fact, a couple of minutes, but a couple minutes of daytime should also be dedicated to the observance of the Kodesh, the holy day. When it comes to Yom Kippur, there are 2 aspects. There is the refraining from constructive activity, from malacha, and there is the observance of inui, the self-deprivation aspects, and we can make things simpler. Stop eating. In other words, Tosefes Yom Kippur would involve stopping all malacha activities and stopping eating and drinking while it's still day. Still Erev Yom Kippur, technically speaking, so the 9th of Tishrei, but nevertheless, one should refrain. What the goal of these triangles is to demonstrate that there is, however, if someone doesn't observe this Tosefes Kedusha, this adding, he nevertheless is not going to be punished, that Mashuach Mechama would serve while wearing the 8 garments, but the Mashuach Mechama, when a question was posed, and certainly questions regarding going into battle were of command either. In other words, there would be no malchus either. If someone eats right up till dark, or someone sows and writes things and does plowing and planting or whatever constructive, there are 39 different constructive activities, and he does them right up to darkness, not including darkness. So we're going to try to prove those 4 points. There's an issue of oynesh, of punishment, and azhara with regard to, those are 2 points, with regard to malacha, and there's oynesh and azhara with regard to inui, all referring to the Tosefes time period, that additional daytime refraining. Later in the source, on the first of the widest lines, you can see we've underlined the key phrase, Azhora le'inui shel yoim atzmoi loi lo madnu. So, minayin. The Azhora, the negative command concerning the fulfillment of inui on Yom Kippur Atzmo, on the day itself, that we haven't learned. We don't have a source yet. So minayin, the Gemara will ask over there, where is it? So at that point is where the source becomes relevant to our immediate issue. Our issue has been an azhora. Again, azhora is a negative command regarding inui. The source will, at that point, suggest where I know that from, and that's going to be reflected in the house markings with the point facing up. We have on the side our mivneh note, Nisyonos limtso azhor le'inui b'Yom Kippur. Those are attempts to find a negative command concerning inui on Yom Kippur. And the inverted house, ikol mifrach, will highlight the expression, the ikol mifrach, I can challenge, I can undo what you said. They represent the chios, rejection. So you're going to have a give and take structure. Now the questions at once, 2 questions without getting a response in between. You don't pose 2 questions immediately. If there is some Maisi law mehacha, the Tana brings the moker, the source for inui, azhora by inui, from the following. And we wrote above here the word etzem. That's just to clue you into the fact that the true source isn't going to be in the Tanaic source itself. It's going to be the line right after it. So the source begins dealing with the issue of Tosefes. You'll see shortly, V'inisem es nafshosechem v'chol melocha lo sa'asu. You are commanded to deprive yourself on Yom Kippur and do not engage in constructive activities. Yachol yehi onush kores al Tosefes melocha. Would a person, let us say, if he continues doing malacha right up to the onset of Yom Kippur, the actual Yom Kippur, would he be chayev kores for not observing the Tosefes? Talmud lomar v'chol hanefesh asher ta'aseh kol malacha be'etzem hayoyim hazeh v'havadati es hanefesh hahi mikerev amo. And from this pasuk, which deals with malacha, we learn al itsumo shel yoim onush kores. Itsumo means on the day itself, the actual day, as the pasuk said, be'etzem, on the essence of the day itself. There is a kores punishment. V'eino onush kores al tosefes malacha. However, there is no kores punishment for one who does malacha during the tosefes, the additional period. And by the way, the concept of Tosefes has relevance not only as we illustrated it at the beginning of the day, but also vis-a-vis the end of the day as well. In other words, there's an official, a technical end of the day, and then there's a concept of adding beyond that. Rashi, though, he focuses the discussion on stopping malacha miba'od yom. So we're focusing our current discussion on stopping before the onset of the day. All we mention is that the concept of Tosefes has relevance also to the end of the day as well. The Gemara continues, Yochol lo yehe onush kores al Tosefes melacha, avu yehe onush kores al Tosefes inui. Maybe there's no kores for doing melacha right up till Yom Kippur proper, but there would be an oynish of kores, a punishment of kores, for eating right up till Yom Kippur proper. Talmud Lomar, the pasuk says otherwise. Ki chol hanefesh asher lo su'uneh be'etzem hayoim hazeh v'nifrisa. So this pasuk features inui, and it mentions kores, and the word etzem appears here as well, the day itself. Al itsumo shel yoim onush kores, the punishment of kores is applicable to the day itself. The eino onush kores al tosefes inui. However, there's no kores punishment for the lack of additional time as inui is concerned. So if one were to eat right up articulated, lip-wise, the words are enunciated but not in an audible fashion. Elo kederech she'omro chana bit yachol lo yeh b'chlal oynish. It could be that there is no punishment. Avol yeh muzhar al tosefes melacha. Muzhar indicates a lav. You'll notice with our markings we have squiggle underlined the key words of onish we had before, word onush, punished, and muzhar, the presence of a negative command. Maybe there is a negative command, and we mentioned before that that could have ramifications for the lashing punishment. But in order for there to be a lashing punishment, there has to be a negative. Is answered, then you would pose the second question. V'im shoal ein machzirin elo echad. And if they would pose, Talmud Lomar v'chol melacha lo yisasu be'etzem hayoim hazeh. And in this pasuk you have the word lo yisasu, that's a negative command. Al itsumo shel yom hu muzar, and in the same pasuk you have the word be'etzem, means on the day itself. So on the day itself he is muzhar, the lo yisasu applies the negative command. The eno muzhar al tosef. Two questions. Hayaz giruni bale keilo biyado. Hayered Shaul, he asked, will the add to the day vis-a-vis refraining from malacha? Yachol lo yehe muzhar al tosefes malacha, avo yehe muzhar al tosefes inui. Maybe there's a negative command concerning one who eats right up till the onset of Yom Kippur. The Gemara answers, V'din hu. And now we're going to apply logic to show that there is no azhora for tosefes inui. What's the logic? Uma melacha shenei heges v'shabosus v'yomim tovim eino musar oleha. Mind you, melacha, which has broader application. It applies to Shabbos and Yom Tov. So it has this more serious side to it, and yet there is no azhora on tosefes malacha. Inui she'enoi noiheg v'shabosos v'yomim tovim. Inui, which is a more limited type commandment, certainly eino din means certainly shelo yehe muzar olav. There's certainly no negative command. Av ol azhora l'inui shel yoim atzmoi lo lomado. Now we're going into a different topic. We're going to the issue of an azhora, a negative command, as regards inui for Yom Kippur itself. We haven't seen a source for that. So minayin, where am I to derive that? Suggestion. Lo yoimar oynesh b'malacha de gomar mi inui. The Torah technically didn't have to write an oynesh, a kores, by a malacha violator. That could have been derived from inui as follows. Uma inui she'enu noheg b'shabosos v'yomim tovim onush kores. Inui, a very limited type commandment. It has no application to Shabbos and Yom Tov, and yet it carries with it the Kores punishment. Malacha sheneheges b'Shabbosos v'Yomim Tovim lo yikol shekain. Malacha, which is prohibited not only on Yom Kippur but on Shabbos and Yom Tov as well. So all the more so, there is understood to be a Kores punishment vis-a-vis Malacha on Yom Kippur. So why does the Torah spell out an oynish for Malacha on Yom Kippur? So I'll tell you why. Mufne, it is available, it's extra, it's there for another purpose other than to tell me the obvious, because as far as the obvious is concerned, that could have been derived. So why does the Torah write it? To make it an available word, lahakish velodun mimenu gezerah shava, to compare and to make a word comparison. Ne'emar oynesh ba'inui v'ne'emar oynesh b'malacha. Truth is that Kores is written in both contexts, by inui and by malacha. Ma malacha lo yonash ela im kin here. Just like by malacha, the punishment exists only because there is also an azhara, and in fact there is an explicit azhara posuk for malacha. So af inui lo onash ela im kin is here. Therefore, by inui as well, one is to understand that there is an azhara as well. So it might not be explicitly written, but through the gezerah shava, it achieves that equivalency. Ika lemifrach. No, we can undo this logic. You were claiming that inui is something that has lesser ramifications. That insofar that it's not binding on Shabbos and Yom Tov, and yet it carries with it an ownership Kores Malacha, which is, so why, we said before, so why is Oynish written by Malacha? It could have been derived from Inui, which has a lesser status. So here we say that's not so clear, and we can argue to the contrary. Ma le Inui isn't a lesser status type thing. Shelo huter michlolo. We find with regard to eating that there's no Torah allowance for eating whatsoever. Tomar b'malacha shehutra michlolo. Malacha, in fact, there's Torah sanction for doing forbidden activities on Yom Kippur itself, and that's in the form of the sacrificial ritual. Everyone knows that on Yom Kippur in the Beis HaMikdash there was slaughtering taking place, there was burning taking place, there were a number of malachas that were taking place that are generally speaking forbidden, and yet the Torah allows them to. So even though with regard to Navi prophecy being allowed, Michlala from the general rule, there's an exception to the general rule of prohibition. So that's an aspect of leniency that you find by Malacha. So if the Torah would have written Kores by Inui, I wouldn't have necessarily known that there's Kores by Malacha. Malacha has this aspect of leniency to it. Ella, let's try a new direction of logic. In fact, picking up on this last point, we're going to construct a new piece of logic. Ella, lo yoimar oynesh be'inui de gomar me malacha. Let the Torah have withheld writing the Kores punishment by inui. It could have been derived from the fact that there's Kores by malacha, as follows. Ma malacha shutru michlala onush Kores. Mind you, malacha, which has a lenient side to it insofar as it's hutra michlala, one is allowed to do certain malachas, and yet, even though it has this lenient aspect to it, it's punishable by kores. Inui shelo hutor michlolo, inui which has no Torah sanction. No, the Torah doesn't sanction any specific times of eating on Yom Kippur. So lo kol shekain. So all the more so, it would carry with it a kores punishment. Lo monemar. So why does the Torah write the oynish by inui? It could have been derived from malacha. Oh, so it's kind of extra. Mufneh. It's available. Lahakish to compare to it. V'ladun mimeno gzera shava, and to conduct or create a word comparison. Ne'amar oynish be'oinoi v'ne'amar oynish b'malacha. The Torah writes oynish in both topics. Ma malacha onash v'hizir, just like by malacha, the Torah writes an oynish and there is also a negative command. Af inui onash v'hizir. So too, with regard to inui, in addition to the oynish, there is also an understood azhara. So that would be our source. Our question originally was, where is azhara written in the Torah by inui? So the answer would be, it's through this gezerah shava of kores between malacha and inui. The Gemara responds, Ika lemifrach, that can be undone. Ma lemalacha, you can't claim that malacha is a lesser type offense, and hence create the logic we just suggested. Shekain nehegis b'shabbosos v'yomim tovim. Malacha has an aspect of stringency, of chumrah, that you don't find by inui. And what's the chumrah or the stringency that you find by malacha? Insofar that it applies to Shabbos and Yom Tov as well. So it could be that in such a case, so there is an there's an oynish of kores. Tomar be'inui she'eno noheg b'shabbosos v'yomim tovim. Without the Torah spelling out kores by inui, I wouldn't have known that there's kores. It doesn't have a relevance to Shabbos. There's no inui on Shabbos and Yom Tov. Therefore, to suggest that the kores that's written by inui is unnecessary, that's not so. It's necessary, and since it's necessary, we can't claim, as we did 2 lines above, that it's mufneh, that it's available for making a word comparison, when it's needed to teach me the very essence of punishment by inui itself, that I wouldn't have known simply by stating punishment or kores by malacha. So, at this point, we're back to the drawing board. How do I know azhara as far as inui on Yom Kippur itself? Amar Ravinos, Ravina answers, Hai Tana, etzem gomar. The Tana is making a gezerah shava not through the oynish, not through kores. That, as we said, isn't available. A word, we don't randomly compare words. First of all, a gezerah shava is based on an oral tradition. And in that context, the word that's being used ought to be available, mufne, meaning it wasn't necessary to have it written per se to teach me the point that it appears to be stating itself. That could have been figured through other means, and the only reason for its presence is to make a word comparison. We weren't successful with regard to kores. We didn't find the kores term being extra. So where do we find an extra expression in this context? We find it with regard to the word etzem. So the Tana compares inui to malacha through the word etzem in both areas, both with regard to malacha and with regard to inui. We find that word be'etzem hayom hazeh, and we say mufne, that the word etzem is an extra expression. The E lo mufne, if it wasn't an extra, or extra means extra and hence available in the final analysis. It's not extra in the simple sense because it's needed for this alternative purpose. It's needed not to tell me the point itself, but rather it's available for making the gezerah shava. The E lo mufne, if it was not available, it wasn't extra, ika lemifrach kideparchinon, we would be able to undo the logic as we've already done, as we've already demonstrated, that you can't derive one topic from the other. You can't derive inui from malacha. So the Gemara says, lai, ironically, lai means in truth, afnuye mufne. There is an extra expression here for making the gezerah shava. Where do you see that it's extra? Michti. Looking into this, we find chamisha kroi ksivi b'malacha. There are 5 psukim in the context of malacha, and they actually are 4 lavim, 4 negative commands, and 1 reference to kores that you find in the Torah regarding Yom Kippur. Chad, one of these 5 is le'azhara d'yamama, warning creating a negative command as far as malach is concerned on the daytime hours. V'chad le'azhara d'leila, 1 concerning nighttime hours. V'chad le'oinish d'yamama, one of the psukim is for teaching me the oinish of a daytime violator, and the chad lo inish d'leila, 1 to teach me about the nighttime violator. The chad, and the 5th expression, the 5th pasuk, la'afnuye, is available, is extra. Lemigmar inui mi malacha, bein d'yamama, bein d'leila, to learn the properties of inui. For the urim v'tumim, the azhara for inui from malacha, bein d'yamama, bein d'leila, whether it be concerning eating during the nighttime of Yom Kippur or the daytime hours of Yom Kippur. So through this gezerah shava of etzem, and we know that we're able to make the gezerah shava because there is an extra term showing us that we are to compare the topics of malacha and inui. We continue in the Gemara. Debei Rabbi Shmuel Tana. In the yeshiva of Rabbi Shmuel, they present the following Tanaic source. Ne'emar kan inui, it says in the context of Yom Kippur, the word inui, and the ne'emar lahalon. Lahalon is a reference to the topic known as Naro Hamurasa. This is a girl who's considered, she's a Nara because she's between 12 and 12 and a half of age, and someone has betrothed her. That means someone has offered her money or something of value in anticipation of taking her as his wife. At the point of offering her money or something of value and her acceptance, she is considered a married woman, and she's considered an Ashes Ish, a married woman, and that makes it such that if she were to conduct intimacy with another man, that would be a capital offense. In the case of Naam Rasa, involves her being participatory in intimacy with another man. And on the side of Gemara, we have a pasuk, Dvarim Chof Beis pasuk Chof Daled. It says, "V'otzesim es shneim el sharo ir hahi," and you shall take the 2 who engaged in this illicit intimacy, the Nara Rasa and the other man, to the gate of the city. Uskaltem oisam bavonim v'omesu es hanaro al dvar sher lo tzako b'ir v'es ho'ish al dvar sher ino es eshes re'ehu u'bi'arta horo mikirbecha. We read the whole pasuk For our purposes, we want to emphasize just one word. You see the word ino, and we dashed underline that on the side of the Gemara. So you see that the word inui appears by Nara Hamuros as well. We continue in the Gemara. 3 lines from the bottom, we said that you have inui kan by Yom Kippur, you have inui lahalon over there by Namarasa. Ma lahalon lo ona shelim ken isir. Just like by Namarasa, there is a punishment, and there's also a negative command in the Torah concerning that illicit relationship. Afkan lo onash elim ken yisir. So too here by Yom Kippur, you are to understand that there is a built-in azhara as well as the stated onesh. Rav Acha bar Yankiv Omar, he says Yolif Shabbos Shabbosoin Mishabbos Breishis. The term Shabbos Breishis means your weekly Saturday, your standard day of Shabbos. So the Pasuk by Yom Kippur not only Iboson, and you have that term by your weekly Shabbos, Ma'ala Halon Lo Onash Elimkin. These are just like by your standard Shabbos. The Torah has a punishment spelled out as well as an azhara spelled out. Afkan, so too by Yom Kippur, Lo Onash Elimkin. He said the Torah states a punishment with an understanding that it carries with it a negative command as well. Again, that's by virtue of a gezerah shava, of a word comparison between two topics. And when that happens, by virtue of the oral law, the word comparison makes it such that the properties of one topic are present in the second topic. So, just like on Shabbos, in addition to the punishment, there is also an azhara, so too by Yom Kippur. Rav Papa Omar. Rav Papa, he has a new approach. He is, up till now, we've seen the use of word comparisons, but Rav Papa says, Hu Gufei Shabbos Ikri. When the Torah speaks about Shabbos and the azhara and the punishments, it is talking about Yom Kippur itself. The word Shabbos, Shabboson, applies, the word Shabbos, or the concept of Shabbos, applies directly to Yom Kippur, not by Yom Kippur being derived from another topic. And where do we see Yom Kippur itself being referred to as Shabbos? Dichtiv, the Pasuk says in Vayikra Perek Chof Gimel, chapter 23, Pasuk Lamed Beis, verse 32. On the side of the Gemara, we've written the Pasuk. It says, Shabbos Shabboson hu lochem v'nisem es nafshosechem b'tisha l'chodesh me'erev, that's b'tisha l'chodesh bo'erev, me'erev ad erev tishbesu Shabbatchem. Well, Tisha l'chodesh is Yom Kippur. That is the night after Tisha l'chodesh, the night after the 9th of Tishrei is Yom Kippur. So, the Gemara at the top line says that Hu Gufei Shabbos Ikri Dichtiv Tishbesu Shabbatchem. That you can see in the Pasuk we read, the last two words of the Pasuk. Bishlama Rav Papa Lo Omar to Rav Acha bar Yankiv. I understand Rav Papa, who was the opinion we just saw, he doesn't go with Rav Acha's approach. Dekra Deksiv Begufei Odif. A pasuk that is stated in the topic itself is Odif, is stronger, is better, is greater. In other words, this is a more solid source. Without relying on word comparisons, you're telling me that Yom Kippur itself is referred to as Shabbos, and when the Torah states Azhoras with regard to the term Shabbos, that's including Yom Kippur. Ela Rav Acha bar Yankiv, my time Eloma Rav Papa. Rav Acha, who relied on a word comparison, why didn't he learn from Tishbesu Shabbatchem? Answer: Mi boy alei lichdesanya. He needs the words Tishbesu Shabbatchem for a separate teaching, for something else, as is taught in the following Tanaic source. And it's on the side of the Gemara, under the Nosea, or topic heading, we've written Mokor Shemoisifin Mechol Al Kodesh B'Yom Kippur Shabbos V'Yom Tov. We alluded to Tosefes in our previous discussion on Omed Aleph. Here we get back to that topic with sources, psukim, verses regarding Tosefes, adding to the holiness from the mundane. In other words, using hours or minutes of the weekday, that which is choil, the weekday, and converting them or elevating them to holy minutes prior to the onset of the official holy day itself. So we have a source, and it says, "V'nisem es nafsho sechem b'tisho lachodesh." You shall afflict yourselves on the 9th of Tishrei. That's the literal reading. Yochol yasu v'sana b'tisha. Does that mean that during the day, the entire day of the 9th of Tishrei, I'm supposed to start my self-deprivation? Talmud Lomer bo'erev. The pasuk that we read already, you can see, has the word bo'erev attached. It's the 9th, but in the evening. I bo'erev yochol mishetechshach. If it says in the night, in the evening, does that mean only after darkness sets in? Talmud Lomar b'tisha. To counterbalance that, the Torah, though, says tisha on the 9th. The darkness after the 9th really is the next day. So b'tisha means the 9th itself. Okay, so how do you resolve this? You start while it's still just a little bit of daytime left to the 9th day. As it ends and the 10th is ushered in, those last few moments of the 9th daytime should be used to observe Inui of Yom Kippur. Mikan shemoisifin mechol ala kodesh. From here we learn that you are to add to the holiness from the mundane time period. The last few minutes of the mundane are elevated to holiness. V'einli ela b'knisaso. So far, this shows us with regard to the beginning of the day, the holy day, b'yitziyaso minayin. With regard to the end of the holy day, the concept of Tosefes also applies. Where do we know that from? Talmud Lomar me'erev ad erev. From one end, from one extreme to the other extreme. In other words, just like at the beginning of the day there was Tosefes, so to the other extreme of the day, the end of the day, there's also Tosefes. Spill over, continue the holiness into the next day. And when we say the next day, maybe we didn't spell it out till now, but many of you already know it anyhow, that the day is defined from the appearance of 3 stars, that the official onset of night. V'eini elo Yom Kippurim. Till now, I would know only with regard to Yom Kippur. Shabbosos minayin. What about the weekly Shabbos? This concept applies as well, the concept of Tosefes. Talmud Lomar tishbesu. Here you've got the words that we were focusing on earlier. Here you see the word is used for Tosefes, and not for that which Rav Papa claimed. Ein li elo Shabbosos. Yomim Tovim minayin. What about standard holidays? Talmud Lomar Shabbatchem. That's an extra word to include other holidays. Ha ketzad. So how is this to be understood? Kol makom shenemar Shavuos. Wherever the Torah indicates Shavuos, like the word Shabbos, means refraining. This is in contrast to, let us say, a day like Hanukkah or Purim. Those are days that don't have restrictions, malacha restrictions associated with them. But those kind of holidays where the Torah warns against constructive activity, where the Torah commands cessation, shvus, moisifin mechol ala kodesh. Concomitant with that is adding from the mundane, in other words, taking from the hours of the mundane and elevating them to an element of holiness. The Gemara continues, Vitano de etzem etzem. This is a reference to that which we saw in Amud Aleph. If you recall, it was the first bow tie. That Tana that learned Azhora of Yom Kippur from the Gezerah Shova of Etzem Etzem, Hai Betisha L'Chodesh, this Betisha L'Chodesh Pasuk that we just saw in the Tanaic source, he doesn't use that Pasuk for Tosefes. So, my Ovid Lei, we should point out that in that particular Tana had made reference to Tosefes, but from another source. In the course of that discussion, he pointed out that there's no Oynish and Azhora for Tosefes. However, there exists Tosefes. And Rashi points out on the upper part of the Rashi commentary, V'tano de etzem etzem, me de itzterich lim'uti l'Tosefes hachol me oynish ume azhora, from the fact that he was preoccupied with excluding Tosefes from the realm of punishment and azhora, memelo shaminon de moisifin. We understand, though, that there is a concept of Tosefes. The high vinisem betisha my ovid late. So that Tana who understands Tosefes will just say from another source, what does he do with this pasuk that we were darshaning in the brisa above, concerning what the brisa had used it for learning Tosefes? That Tana has another source for Tosefes. So what does he do with this particular pasuk? Answer: Mi boyale licheditoni chia bar rav mi difti. He needs it for the following teaching. The Tani chia bar rav mi difti. That's chia bar rav from Difti. It's the name of a place. He teaches the following: Vinisam es nafshasechem betisha. Is that pasuk so? Is it so that we fast on the 9th of Tishrei? Valo be'asor misanin. We practice our tainus, our fasting, on the 10th of Tishrei. So what does the pasuk mean when it says 9th? Elolomar loch. It conveys the following: Kol oichel v'shoisa b'chi. Anyone who eats and drinks on the 9th of Tishrei in anticipation of the fasting day of Yom Kippur on the 10th. Malav Akosov Kilu is Anet Shiv Asiri. He's given credit. He's considered as if he fasted not only on the 10th, but on the 9th as well. So just like the fasting on the 10th is considered a very great mitzvah, so too eating and drinking on the 9th is considered a very great mitzvah. Continuing in the Gemara, with the new topic on the side, we have a topic heading, Oichlin umashkin she'enon lu'uyin la'achila. The Gemara, Ochal oichlin she'en ru'uyin la'achila, it's a quote from our Mishnah, Omar Rava, Kos pilpuli b'yoyma de Kippuri poter. A second point, Kos zangvila b'yoma de Kippuri poter. Kos, for our purposes, means chewed on. We have seen this term in recent shiurim, where it has to do with eating. Eating something that you ordinarily would not eat. Pilpuli is a spice, sometimes translated as pepper in the context of pepper spice or peppercorns. one who chews on them on Yom Kippur would not be chews. It doesn't mean just chewing and swallowing it on Yom Kippur. He is not considered in violation of Inui. Rashi says, "Kos pilplin ein ze yishuv hadas, she'ein ze derech achiloso." It doesn't create the state of yishuv hadas, a peace of mind, which represents the undoing of Inui. It doesn't accomplish yishuv hadas, for this is not the normal way of consuming pilpuli. Peppercorns are used as spices in cooking foods, but just popping them into your mouth and chewing and eating them like that, that's not its normal way of consumption. Hence, it doesn't create yishuv hadas, peace of mind or comfort. Likewise, Rava made a second point or second illustration of this. Kos, the same verb of chewing and swallowing, zangvila. Zangvila is another kind of spice, zangvil. And he eats this on Yom Kippur, potter, he is exempt. On the side, we have an explanation of the diamonds that we're going to see, and this is introduced by the Mivneh, the structural note. Kushios al hodikam Rava kos pilpuli v'zangvila b'yom Kippuri. Rava mentioned 2 points, and the diamonds are numbered as one and a second diamond later. They are questions. The first diamond corresponds to the first point Rava made, because the Gemara will bring a source featuring pilpulin, and then the second diamond introduces not a Tanaic source, but a question from Rav Nachman, and that's going to be used as a question on Rava. Questions are raised, as we just illustrated, and answers are also given. And that is the next marking. You can see the double underline, lo kashya. The Gemara will resolve both questions in actually the same way. The same distinction is going to be made. So now we turn to the Gemara, Meisvei. Before we read the source, let's take advantage of a pasuk that we've written on the side of the Gemara. Vayikra, Perek Yutes pasuk Chav Gimel, it says, V'chi savo el haaretz, when you come into the land of Israel, V'netatem kol eitz ma'achol, and you plant any fruit, any tree that is ma'achol. We'll call it, without literally translating, it's a fruit tree, fruit-bearing tree. Varaltem or losu es pirio shalosh shonim yelochem arelim lo yeochel. It shall remain for a period of 3 years. Its first 3 years from the point that it takes root, plus 3 years, you are not to eat from any fruits that may come out. That's called orla. Now we turn back to our Gemara. Hoya Rabbi Meir Omer. Mimashma shenema varaltem or loso es pirio. From the fact that the Torah says, and you shall refrain from its fruit. Eini yodea she'etz maicholhu. Wouldn't it be obvious then that we're dealing with a fruit-bearing tree? Elomat Talmud lomar eitz ma'achol. Why does the Torah spell out that it's a fruit-bearing tree? It could have just said, "Natatem kol eitz varaltem loso es pirio," and you shall refrain from its fruits. Why does the term ma'achol have to be spelled out? Eitz ma'achol, a fruit-bearing tree. So the term eitz ma'achol tells me eitz shetam eitzo pirio shove. It's a hint to a type of tree whose wood has the same taste as its fruit. Heve omer ze pilpulin. This standard or description is met, is fulfilled, is illustrated through the pilpulin tree. So we see that pilpulin is called ma'achol. The pasuk calls it eitz ma'achol. It's a food item. And l'lamdecho shapilpulin chayovim ba'arla. It tells us that pilpulin is a type of tree and not a vegetable, and as such, Orla applies. Orla does not apply to tomato plants. Those are not considered eitzim, but the botanical entity from which peppercorns emanate is considered a tree, hence subject to Orla, which is a tree-related commandment. V'ein Eretz Yisrael chasera klum, and we also see that the land of Israel lacks nothing. In other words, even peppercorn trees grow in Israel. Shenemar, Israel is described as lo sechsar kol ba. It is not lacking, everything is contained therein. For our purposes, we want to focus, as Gemara markings always strives to do, focus on the main point. In this source, we dashed underline the word pilpulin. We wrote above it, it's called a maichal. That would seem to contradict that which Rava says, that the consumption of pilpuli is not a Yom Kippur violation because it's not a maichal, it's not food. The Gemara says, lo kasha, there is no contradiction, there's no difficulty here. Ha b'retifta, ha b'yaveshta. Retifta, loosely translated, would mean it's fresh, and yaveshta, it's dried out. When the peppercorns are fresh, they are fit, they're roy for eating, and they can be described as a maichal. When they're dried out, so then Rava's din applies. Amalei Ravina Limeremar, the Amar Rav Nachman, and this question we'll see is really focused on Rava number 2. Did Rav Nachman not say, Hai Himlusa, the Asi Mibei Hindui? The Himlusa, which comes from Hindui. Now again, we're dealing with a type of spice. And Bei Hindui is a place. Sharia, it is mutter. Now Rashi says that on Sharia, Rashi says the ein bo mishum bishulei nochrim. This hindua, if it's cooked up by a non-Jew, there's a prohibition that you find in Maseches Avodah Zarah that Jews are not to eat meals made of prepared, cooked up by idol worshippers. So that rule is a rabbinic ruling, and it applies to items that cannot be eaten in their raw state. So Rav Nachman tells us that himlasa is something that is allowed to be eaten, even if it's cooked up by an idol worshipper, because it can be eaten as it is in its raw state. Umevorchen, the Gemara continues and says, Umevorchen olel borei priadoma, and you make a bracha of borei priadoma on it, being that it's a vegetable category, it grows from the ground. What do we see? We see from here that himlasor, zangvila, is considered a maichel, something that you eat. We see from here, of course, then, we see a difficulty for that which Rava taught. And what says lo kasha, there's no difficulty here. Ha b'retifta, v'ha b'yaveshta. If it's fresh, so then that's what Rav Nachman was referring to. If it's dry, so that's what Rava was referring to. Before we continue, we just want to note that We're going to deal with more items that are not considered food substances, and what is the din if one eats them. Tano Rabbanan. Ochal, a person ate ole konim, potter. Lulve gefanim chayav. If a person ate the leaves of reed plants on Yom Kippur, he's exempt. If he ate lulve gefanim, tendrils that grow on vines, part of a grape cluster, so eating the tendrils, he will be chayav. Elu hein lulve gefanim. What is considered lulve gefanim that is edible? Omar Rav Yitzchok Magdala. Rav Yitzchok Magdala, that's his name and the place that he comes from. Kol shelivlivu me Rosh Hashanah vi'ad Yom HaKippurim. Anything that blossoms from Rosh Hashanah to Yom Kippur, at that point it's considered edible. However, if it would livlivu, it would emerge before Rosh Hashanah, by the time Yom Kippur comes, it would already have hardened to the point that it's not considered edible. Rav Kahana, a second approach, says, Omar Kol Shloshim Yom, that for its first 30 days, since it appears, it's considered edible. This would be a longer time period for its being categorized as food. In other words, if we're dealing with Yom Kippur as our target, so 30 days before that would be basically the 10th of Elul, the month before Tishrei. Anything that emerges prior to the 10th of Elul, so it would not be a Yom Kippur violation if one eats it on Yom Kippur, more than 30 days having lapsed. Tanya Kavosei Rav Yitzchok Magdala. We have a Tanaic source that follows the understanding of Rabbi Yitzchok, and it reads, Ochal, Ole Konim Potter, Velulve Gefanim Chayav. Eluhein Lulve Gefanim. The following are, Elul Gefanim, Kol Shalivum Rosh Hashanah, Vi'ad Yom HaKippurim. That is the same standard that we saw under Rabbi Yitzchok Magdala's name. Before continuing in the Gemara, on the side we have our Nosei, our topic heading, and we've written Medaikim a Mishnah. We infer from the Mishnah, the Kotoni, the Mishnah that said Shasa Sir Omurias Potter Ha Choymetz Chayav. The Mishnah says that drinking Sir or Murias, different liquids. We said in general the term Sir is associated with brine. That is exempt. However, one who would drink vinegar, that would be guilty on Yom Kippur. So the Mishnah is the Gemara itself will make this inference, and based on that, the Gemara will say our Mishnah is in accordance with Rebbe. That Rebbe holds vinegar to be a type of beverage, if you will, a drinkable beverage, and hence constituting a Yom Kippur violation. Regarding that, we will see in the Gemara that Rav Gidol Bar Menashe, he rules that the halacha does not follow Rebbe. Now, upon hearing that, people concluded, the halacha does not follow Rebbe, so that vinegar is not considered a beverage. If that's the case, let's go have some vinegar drinks on Yom Kippur. And the result of that was something quite unfortunate, and Rav Gidol then will be found in this Gemara defending his psak, criticizing that which the masses did upon hearing his ruling initially. And we highlight his defense points with a double underline, and on the side of the Gemara we have this under our Mivneh structural note, Amar Rav Gidol Megain al Piskoi She'ein Halacha Kerebi. Rav Gidol will be seen defending his point that, or his ruling that the halacha doesn't follow Rebbe. So now in the Gemara, let us see this. Shosot Tzir Omurius Potter Ha Hoimetz Chayav. We infer that maybe for drinking Tzir and Murius one would be exempt, but for drinking Chometz one would be Chayav. The Mishnah issues its exemption only as far as Tzir and Murius, but not vinegar. Masnisin Moni, our Mishnah is in accordance with whom? Rebbe, this reflects Rebbe's opinion. The Sanya, Rebbe Oimer Chometz Meshiv Es HaNefesh. Rebbe says that vinegar is capable of restoring a person's spirit, meaning Yom Kippur is a day that we're supposed to experience inui, self-deprivation, and Meshiv Es HaNefesh, that is an undoing of inui. As Rashi says, Umavatil Es HaInui, it cancels, it voids the state of inui. Dorash Rav Gidol Bar Menashe Mi Biri Denarish. Rav Gidol from Biri Denarish, the name of his place, he says, Ein halacha karebi. Well, Lashana, the next year, Nafki Kuli Alma Mosku Vishasu Chola. The next year, everyone went out on Yom Kippur and they filled up their cups with vinegar. Now, Mosgu, Rashi adds, and this is very important, Nosnu Bo Mayim Lahatish Koch, they added water to their vinegar to weaken it. Otherwise, vinegar is a very intense type of liquid. So they moderated it by adding water to it. They diluted it. Shoma Rav Gidol Vikbid. Rav Gidol heard of what happened, and he was upset. Omar, Rav Gidol said, Eimar de Amri Ana Dievet. I only said post facto, if one happened to have drunk vinegar on Yom Kippur, so he's not considered a Yom Kippur violator. L'chatchilo mi'amri, did I ever say as a first choice to proactively go ahead and drink vinegar on Yom Kippur? Eimar de Amri Ana Purta. Furthermore, I said a little bit. Tuva mi'amri, did I say to fill up entire mugs full of vinegar and drink it? If I said that the halacha doesn't follow Rebbe and that vinegar is not considered a beverage, I said so chai, meaning in its undiluted state. Mozug mi'amri, did I say thusly with water added to it as well? Absolutely not. So, as you can see, Rav Gidol, by merely saying Ein halacha karebi, people got the wrong impression. They went out and acted on their own, upsetting Rav Gidol very much, and of course Rav Gidol showed us how they got it all wrong. Before we conclude, let us remind you that if you wish to be in touch with us, we can be reached at gmarkings@gmail.com. With that, we conclude our Shiur for today.